Hi guys, welcome to Signal Path. Today we're doing something that I am extremely excited for. We're talking about the newest version of kind of my day-to-day pedal board. This is something that has been in the works for a number of years, and really I started gathering materials to build this kind of when COVID hit and everyone was locked indoors, and I just never took the time to finally kind of finish the vision. And since that point, there's been a lot of drift in terms of what I wanted on the board and how I wanted to approach wiring it, layout, all of those kinds of things. As I'm sure if you've ever planned a pedal board, you can probably relate. But I think there are some really, really cool things to talk about, and hopefully a couple of things that you can take away for your own personal build. I think a couple things to note. I really did want something that was hand soldered, and so I soldered everything myself, but this is not kind of one of those very professional builds. This is something that I did in my spare time, and I hope you take that as both a bit of a disclaimer, but also a bit of encouragement that if you're not a full-time kind of electrical engineer or electrician or similar, you can still achieve some pretty neat results. I was very, very happy with how the build came out. It's working great so far, and I've had it working for the last couple of weeks. But I did kind of hand solder everything myself, and really there's a few things that I wanted from this board. One was I wanted everything above the board, because on my trailer trash board there was an amount of wiring and power supply underneath that would sometimes kind of come loose or dangle and just kind of knock around, and so I could never really take it out of its live-in case. This is, because it's mounted on a flat board with a riser, much easier to sort of take around. I don't need a case if I don't want it, and I did build this to fit in the old live-in case for the trailer trash board, but I think I'm just going to get rid of all of that altogether. To talk a bit about the board, there's a kind of a few things. It's got all of the essentials: great delay, great reverb, a few of my favorite kind of granular and ambient effects. And the biggest thing that I wanted from this board was the ability to swap in and out pedals, both on the board and off the board, for experimentation and just keeping things fresh. And so I included a few pedals from my favorite builders, things like Bliss, Red Panda, Strymon, that kind of use common formats between their pedals. So if I ever want anything from that make, I can kind of swap that in without really changing too much about the layout. But I also have a mono to stereo audition loop that's kind of off the board. So if I wanted to, I could add another pedal or potentially a couple of pedals without having to change the layout. It's all running through my Mastermind PVC, which has kind of been old faithful in terms of my MIDI control, as well as just kind of live playing management on that side of things. There's going to be a lot of this that seems familiar if you've watched past board run-throughs, but I think this is a pretty massive upgrade in my mind, both in terms of build quality, but just in terms of the flexibility and availability. We'll do kind of an in-depth MIDI walk through and how I've sort of set up the PVC, because I think there's a few templates that might be worth taking away just to make your MIDI programming and kind of workflow a little bit easier, but that's going to be a different video. Today we're just going to talk about the build and the layout and why I chose what I chose and a little bit of what it sounds like. So let's jump into it. But before we do that, it would mean a ton to me if you would go ahead and like this video, which just lets YouTube know to recommend this kind of content in the future, and subscribe to the channel to follow along. Let's dive in. All right, so let's take a look at the board and just kind of the overall flow of how we have things set up and how we built this. But I built all of this with a get off my case board and a fixed pedal board's riser. All of this is kind of custom soldered cable and power cables. And is it a sort of Instagram worthy build? I don't think so, but I think it is something that feels very practical. Everything is very locked down in a way that feels like it's not going to go anywhere. Hard mounted the Canvas Power 22, which is powering the entire board and then some. But let's go kind of pedal by pedal, starting with the 29 pedals EUNA, which is kind of the input of my entire board. Without it, let's kill the Kali 76 for just a moment as well. With it on. Just immediately a bit more definition. If we kill the delay and reverb for just a moment as well, we can kind of hear with a bit more clarity. It's really just opening up the humbuckers and making things feel a little bit more full and present. From there, it comes down to the tuner, which is always on and reading, and from there it goes into the RJM, which is doing all of my MIDI, all of my, not all of, but most of my audio switching as well, kind of is the central hub, so that way when I want to save like a sound or set of sounds, that's easy to make happen. But the first in the lineup is the POG. I've got a pretty subtle setting that I use most of the time. I do plan on doing the MIDI mod for this, but I need to find time to borrow a drill press, so it hasn't happened so far. But we'll talk through like use cases, but if you haven't used a POG before, you should. It really sounds great. It's one of my favorite pedals. I've bought and sold it more times than I can remember at this point, and it's always served me really, really well. And I run that into the Kali 76 because I like the way that compression after the POG just helps glue things together a little bit. Helps kind of like, I think, just kind of keep the attacks of both the octave and my guitar signal to just a little bit more cohesion. So without that compression, I get a lot of questions about why I order it like that, but that's kind of my thinking on that side. But without the POG, the Kali 76 is giving me a ton of just kind of lift and preampy character. Without it, you know, it's nice, bright, but pretty characterless, I would say. We can even bring up the input a little bit just to squish a bit harder. So that's really something that I just like to have on because it's giving me a lot more fullness. It helps me correct for different kinds of pickups too, especially on single coils where they just don't always stand up to the drives the way that I want them to. Getting a little bit more fullness before we get into gain, I find pretty helpful. And if you haven't seen it already, I have a whole video walking through the EUNA, the Kali 76 and the ParaEQ, and how I use that for kind of clean tone shaping. But one of my favorite compressors has been on the board in multiple versions for a long time. After the compressor is this kind of rotating gain spot. So the 385 again, and I've really been enjoying that sound with these pickups. It's really... It's everything you want in that like super full kind of high gain world, and with some reverb. A little bit of chorus as well. that's kind of been filling my like shoegaze dreams lately. Something that's been kind of fun to mess with. It just sounds crazy, which I love. The Brothers is next up, and this has kind of been the replacement for my King of Tone. I feel like it definitely takes a little bit more tweaking to get the sounds that I'm looking for from this, but I do think it does sound great when you find it. And I'm mostly using that for kind of pretty grindy, but you know, I think nice sounding, pretty and bright. Last of the gain is back underneath here with the Greer Lightspeed. Just adding like a nice kind of rhythm grit. This is kind of my favorite drive to feed into nice for ambient things, and then you know, with like a lighter verb, I think the Brothers and the Lightspeed stack really pretty. So that's kind of the gain options that I'm working with at the moment. And then finally, I've got the ParaEQ on the board, and this is kind of my multi-purpose fixer. So something's not quite sitting right. Say I want a little bit more clarity and a little bit less mids. It lets me kind of like mellow things out and kind of set up like if I wanted something that felt big but also very mellowed in the dry tone. Without the EQ. It's nice, but with it, it just has this laid back and so it's awesome for that. It's also kind of something that you can use like if you really wanted to push something specific. Say we wanted a really kind of mid-forward sound. It gets really extreme. Like it really is something that Without the EQ. Pull those highs down. This isn't even kicking in the boost. If we put that on, it's awesome and gnarly if you want it to be, but that's not usually how I'm using it. But out of that, so the first 6 loops are here, and then we come out of this for a moment to the Vertex boost, which has been on the board for a long time as well. This is serving as my volume pedal. The expression pedal links here. That's what that's doing, and it's a great boost in its own right. Really simple, just kind of the boost you might need for especially live performance or pushing an amp. I find really pleasant, and the volume feature is amazing. That's why I use it. And from there, we head to what is currently the tonal recall, but it's just kind of a catch-all for all things mono kind of modulation, mono ambience, and that sort of thing. I put the mood in there, the mood Mark I occasionally. But right now it's the tonal recall. And this is fully tied into tap tempo, and so all of the timeline, the dig, and the tonal recall and microcosm are all tied into the same tap, and so I'm able to kind of send a clock, and if I want to, change the tempo up. But one of my favorite ways to kind of add a little bit of sway and kind of fun movement to sounds right now. While still leaving like the tone feeling like brooding and, I don't know, dry to an extent. So that's been really, really nice. And then out of there, it goes out to this junction box, which is doing a few things. It's my output, but it is also kind of this loop that allows me to put a pedal midpoint into the signal chain. It sends out the mono signal, and it can bring back a mono or stereo signal. And from that, depending on kind of what it's bringing back, the RJM will treat it differently, but I can put a mono to stereo split outside the board if I wanted to use, something like the synesthesia from GFI or any other kind of mono to stereo pedal. I could put it there and it could live off the board, and this also has a power tap on the side, so when I do want to use another pedal, I can just pull that power tap off, and powers the pedal from the Canvas 22, manages the audio. Really, really nice for keeping things kind of manageable, but it comes from there straight back into the RJM. And now our signal from here on out is kind of in stereo. And so the stereo split, when we're not using anything off the board, is the Mobius. And I love this. This is kind of a huge game changer for me. I'm going to give it a little bit of verb from here on out too, just because I like it. But been a few sounds that I've really been enjoying lately. But who can really argue with like the results of a big kind of wobbly chorus or modulation with a bunch of reverb? So that's loop 7. In loop 8, we have the Tensor. This kind of does all things like kind of live pitch playback. Sometimes you just want something glitchy and pitchy. There's a whole video that talks about kind of the ways that I've been using Tensor, but really, really love that pedal. And this kind of also subs out for other red Panda pedals because they use the same in and out scheme, so it's easy to swap things that way. After that is the Mood Mark II, which I'm using for kind of a different flavor of similar stuff. That with the Tensor together. Pretty fun, but love the mood. Couldn't imagine really building a board like this without it at this point. So love having that there, and obviously with the micro looper and kind of the fine control there, I wanted that on the front of the board, which is why it's kind of here in that spot. And then finally the gen loss. And the reason the gen loss is kind of at the end of the RJM is because it's nice taking stuff from like the Tensor and the Mood and crushing it way down. And this is without any delay at this point or anything else that would kind of add flavor. This is just a tiny bit of reverb, some pitch, and that lo-fi goodness. So love that combination. And after it leaves the RJM, it heads up to the Microcosm, which is doing Microcosm things. I use this for most of my looping and those kinds of sounds, so it's nice to kind of have as like a third layer on top of the Tensor and Mood. And it's also useful to have like some of those micro looper pieces before the gen loss and some of them after, because I think it is kind of cool to have like one set of clean repeats that's adding some dimension. And after the Microcosm, it heads down to the Strymon Dig, which is just an incredible... I mean, if you want that U2 thing. Maybe a little bit of chorus. can't help myself with that one. It's one of my favorite pedals to kick on, and this is something that often for, you know, kind of live uses, I'm just turning this on and off with my foot. It's kind of an extra layer of ambience if I need it. But it's nice because this is completely like... completely in lockstep with the other delays, and so I can layer that in however I want. If I want, it works great with the timeline, but I can also layer this in as kind of the other piece and giving us like a firm quarter. So really cool to have. I've never really had like a bunch of synchronized delay on a board before, but I've been really enjoying that. And then the timeline is the first Strymon pedal I ever owned, and I've kind of been hooked ever since. I mean, the uses are pretty bread and butter, but it does the job so well, and it's so easy to kind of find your way around on that. Having the Strifecta on the board has just been a great workflow for me, and these are not effects that I like often need novelty from. They're things that I need to work every time and work quickly, and I think Strymon does have tons of novelty in their designs, but the thing that I think they have in spades is just that that kind of mindset of not having to make you work for it. And there's some menu stuff and things you can get into, but you can pretty much pull up a mode and a time division and start working, and that's what I love about it. There are kind of a few effecty things I am using in here. I do use occasionally, like... the ice mode has a flavor. You know, the lo-fi mode is really fun. Just really, really soft and diffuse. I mean, but a lot of times I'm just rocking... stuff like that, and it works great for me. And then finally, the last of the chain is the Bigsky, and the Bigsky does the thing. Really requires no introduction, but essentially that is the flow of the board. I want to talk about kind of how I'm using and thinking about a few of these things a little bit deeper, but that is how it functions. It flows from there down to the junction box and out of the board, but it feels like just a lot of features, a lot of functionality in a very, very tight space, and I've been loving that. But yeah, let's jump into a couple of like recipes that I've been using. One of the things I'm most excited about with this build is just the amount of possibilities of kind of rewire without rewiring. And I've kind of made the leads and the formats pretty thoughtful to areas that I think I'm often going to be swapping out. One of those is like high gain. I like a lot of different flavors of high gain, but I rarely need more than one on the board at a time. And so I've got kind of a rotation where that 385 sits. But what I love is that the leads are long enough to take side jacks or top jacks. Additionally, the tonal recall is kind of this mono catch-all spot for anything that's inspiring, and where the mood sits is kind of like twinkly and kind of interesting. But I've also kind of thoughtfully put, you know, different makes of pedals in here so that I can easily swap between pedals within a brand. And so I'm going to make a few swaps before we start talking about looping. And you'll see, like, without really changing too much, I don't want too much novelty in the delay and reverb side. Some of my foundational stuff like compression, nice to keep constant. But there's a lot of flexibility and ways to wrap in the collection that I've been really enjoying. So let's kind of make a few swaps here. And so now, you know, it's not like a total turnover, but the reality is there's a lot more to play with, and there's a lot more things. Like I've got the particle, which I can swap out for the Tensor or any of the Red Panda stuff because it all connects the same, or you know, for Strymon, the new V2 stuff, you know, I can swap the dig out for anything that fits that sort of TRS in, TS out. And so that's kind of how I've designed the board, is for like maximum swappability. And I think that's something that gives me the best of both worlds in terms of locked down wiring and very, very like reliable soldering, but also kind of the fun and flexibility of a always changing board. So I'm really, really enjoying that aspect of things. All right, so let's talk about looping. So normally when I'm looping, I start with something that is usually kind of compression, delay, and reverb is my starting place as the template sound, which all other sounds are processed through. Something like this is going to work well. And now I'm using my Microcosm as the main sort of source and primary looper on the entire pedal. We could use the timeline as well. There's a few kind of other options on the board, but Microcosm's sort of suite of features is my favorite. So we'll let that play for a second. It's worth noting this is immediately into reverse. And that's really nice on its own. But where the fun kind of begins is this is all living after the last several loops of kind of our flavor and kind of fun. And so if we wanted to add something that was real high but real dark, I would kick on the gen loss and kind of use that to kick in something that's a little bit different. Or if we wanted to make the kind of low end and kind of way down feel a little bit more substantial, kick in the Tensor. Just add that subtle movement in the low end. Really, really nice. Let's add that to our loop. And then once we've arrived at something that feels like kind of how we want to hear it, I like to add tons of just kind of stereo separation by using a high mix delay on the dig. And I'm going to turn the tone actually quite a bit down to make it dark, but feel like there's this big separation. And this is kind of the part where I just walk away from the pedalboard for a while. That's how we loop. So that's the pedalboard. There's kind of, as soon as I finished building this, there was a million things that I was like, oh, that would have been cool to do. And there's always a bunch of tweaks, but I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Is this something that looks like your dream board, or would you build something completely differently? Are there areas you think I could improve on this? Are there things that you took away from this that are helpful? I'd love to know, because I love making these videos, but I want to make sure they're useful and interesting and relevant. So let me know your thoughts, but thanks for watching.